It should have been a routine landing. Rain on the windshield, a short runway ahead. Two experienced pilots in control. But seconds after touchdown, something is wrong. One engine pulls the plane backward. The other, it pushes it forward. The plane starts fighting itself. The plane is not slowing down. And there's barely 2,000 meters, 6,500 feet of wet asphalt between them. And disaster. 14 seconds later, 199 lives are gone. To understand how a modern jet could end up fighting itself on one of Brazil's busiest runways, we need to start from the beginning. São Paulo, Brazil, July 17, 2007. Congonhas Airport, a critical hub, built in a dangerously tight space. Pilots call it the aircraft carrier, a narrow strip of runway perched on a hilltop, boxed in by city on all sides. It's not just a nickname, it's a warning. Originally built in 1930s, Congonhas became increasingly surrounded as São Paulo expanded in size. The result? Runways that are too short for modern jets, and almost no margin for error. Runway 35 left, just 1,940 meters, or about 6,365 feet long. Barely enough even in dry conditions. But this wasn't just about length. The airport sat on a plateau, sharp drop-offs on both sides, urban neighborhoods at the end, and most critically, no runway and safety area, no RISA. RISA is a stretch of paved or prepared ground, designed to stop or slow a jet that overruns the runway. International guidelines strongly recommend one. Congonhas had none. It wasn't a hidden problem. It had been flagged again and again. Still nothing was done. And if that weren't enough, the airport was not even certified under Brazil's own safety code, RBHA 139. No approved operations manual, no mandated oversight. Construction and safety procedures went unchecked. And tonight, the sky opens up. Heavy rain begins slashing the hilltop. And the cracks in the system, both literal and systemic, are about to be tested. TAM Airlines Flight 3054, an Airbus A320, registration Papa Romeo Mike Bravo Kilo, with 181 passengers and 6 crew on board, heading home to São Paulo from Porto Alegre. In the cockpit, Captain Henrique Stefanini de Sacco and First Officer Kleber Lima, both highly experienced. The captain had over 13,000 hours in total, with more than 2,200 on the A320. The first officer, over 14,000 hours including nearly 240 on the same aircraft. They were seasoned professionals. But tonight, even with all that experience, they'll face a challenge that pushes them past the edge. As they line up for landing, the pilots go over a crucial detail. One of the plane's 2 thrust reversers on engine number 2 is deactivated. It had been taken offline days earlier due to a leak in the inner actuator. Perfectly legal and standard maintenance procedure under the aircraft's minimum equipment list or MEL. Thrust reversers help slow an aircraft after touchdown by literally reversing engine thrust. And this plane had already landed on the same runway, with that reverser out. But tonight, the conditions are worse. Short runway, wet surface, no grooving. And now, one less tool to stop. One system offline, and one more layer of safety gone. News from the ground confirms their fears. The runway is wet and dangerously slick. But this wasn't just any wet runway. Runway 35 left had been resurfaced just weeks earlier, in May and June 2007. But the new pavement was missing something critical: grooves. Those narrow cuts in the asphalt, they're not cosmetic. They channel water away, break surface tension, and give tires something to grip. Without them, even light rain can turn a runway into a sheet of glass. The perfect setup for aquaplaning, where wheels don't grip, they glide. Pilots had reported poor braking here for years. In 2006, the surface was retextured. Eventually, they repaved it. But the grooves? Still delayed. In the days before the crash, rainfall had soaked the city. 31.7 millimeters on July 16th. 7.7 millimeters more on the 17th. Post-crash testing confirmed the truth. Water could not drain fast enough. The texture was too shallow. On that night, even the pavement could not help them. The concerns were not theoretical. In the days leading up to the crash, pilot reports started piling up. July 16th, just one day before the accident, crews reported the runway was slippery. A lot slippery. Some even reported aquaplaning. One transport aircraft actually experienced aquaplaning that very day. Another near miss involving a Boeing 737 the year before ended with the crew performing a ground loop, just to avoid sliding off the end of the runway. These were not isolated complaints. They were warning signs, flashing red. And yet, the runway stayed open. Airport administrators were asked to verify the conditions multiple times. Their reports: no water patches, no water films. But the grooves, the ones that were supposed to drain the water, still hadn't been cut into the asphalt. And no formal system existed for accurately measuring how much water was really on the runway. On July 17th, after a brief closure, Congonia's 35 left was cleared for operations once again. The surface was declared wet, but safe it wasn't. The pilots knew exactly what they were landing into: a short runway, no re-sign, fresh reports calling it slick when wet. Captain Stefanini, the pilot flying, makes a critical decision. He lands the plane manually, not on autopilot. That way he can touch down right at the threshold and use every single meter of runway to stop. But the captain isn't at 100%. About 30 minutes from landing, he mentions a mild headache. It's a small detail, but in the context of what's to come, maybe not so small. Meanwhile, Brazil's aviation system is under strain. Delays, cancellations, a backlog of frustration boiling over. The report even notes allegations of political interference, making the situation worse. Crews were under pressure, not just from management but from passengers. There are reports of verbal abuse, threats, even physical aggression. For pilots, the tension is constant, especially when flying into challenging airports like Congonhas. And here's the quiet danger. Field research found a perceived pressure within TAM to avoid diversions or go-arounds. Even though the airline's formal policies supported them, pilots felt a subtle resistance. Diverting meant delays, unhappy customers, extra costs, and over time that pressure can start to affect decisions, especially when every second counts. Through the sheets of rain, the runway finally comes into view. 300 feet, 200 feet, 100, lined up with the center line aiming straight for the numbers. Outside, the runway lights flicker through the blur. Inside, the cockpit is tense, every movement precise. Then comes the voice. It's the automated call-out, reminding the pilots to reduce thrust for landing. But in this moment, that calm robotic voice will be the last normal thing they hear. Touchdown, the wheels hit the soaked concrete 142 knots. Time to stop. Captain Stefanini begins the landing sequence. Brakes on. Thrust reversers deployed. Or at least that's what should have happened. The flight data recorder lays it out, second by second. The left thrust lever is pulled back to the reverse position. Reverse kicks in. The engine decelerates 1.03 pr. But the right thrust lever, it stays forward, still in the climb position. And the right engine, instead of idling, surges to 1.18 EPR, full climb power. The Airbus is now split in two mechanically, one side pulling back, the other pushing forward. And here's the twist. When that mismatch happens, the retard call-out, the one meant to remind pilots to reduce thrust, shuts off. No voice, no warning, just silence and rising power. Now one engine is pulling the plane backward, the other pushing it forward. The Airbus is fighting itself, caught in severe asymmetric thrust. And on a wet, slick runway with less than 2,000 meters, 6,500 feet to work with. That's a nightmare. Spoilers don't deploy. Auto brakes don't engage. Why? Because both thrust levers must be near idle for those systems to activate. Only the anti-skid system works, trying to prevent wheel lockup. But it can't fight a jet engine still pushing forward at climb power. The plane is not slowing down. It's barely slowing at all. The combined forward thrust from the right engine and the lack of effective braking on the slick surface means their speed is still dangerously high. At 6 seconds after touchdown, the speed is still 130 knots. At 10 seconds, over 120 knots. At 14 seconds, still over 90 knots. On a slick runway with asymmetric power, it's like trying to stop a car with one foot on the gas. And now the jet is being pulled hard to the left, straight toward the edge of the runway. Inside the cockpit, the realization hits. They're running out of runway, and the plane is still moving far too fast. And now, there's nothing they can do. At 6:48 p.m. local time on July 17, 2007, just 14 seconds after touchdown, TAM Flight 3054 blasts off the end of runway 35 left at over 90 knots. Without a runway and safety area to slow it down, it clears the busy Washington Louis Avenue, barreling over traffic in a terrifying blur. With its momentum unchecked, the massive jet, still moving at 96 knots, slams into the TAM Express cargo building right next to a gas station. The impact is catastrophic. The fully fueled aircraft, carrying a significant amount of fuel due to tankering from Porto Alegre, explodes into a raging fire that burned for more than 24 hours. What's left is devastation. Everyone on board, 187 passengers and crew, perish. On the ground, another 12 lives are lost among the people who were in the building and at the gas station. In just minutes, a routine flight home becomes the deadliest aviation disaster in Brazil's history. The question echoed through the wreckage. How? How does a modern jet flown by experienced pilots turn a standard landing into unimaginable tragedy? Brazil's investigation agency, CENIPA, arrives on scene. But there's almost nothing left. The aircraft is gone, consumed by fire. Their only hope, the black boxes, the flight data recorder, the cockpit voice recorder, somewhere in the scorched tail section, buried beneath the wreckage. Against all odds, they found them, buried deep in the wreckage, scorched, battered, and blackened by fire. The flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder had survived. The intense heat had melted parts of the aircraft around them. The aluminum housing warped. The insulation charred. They should have been unreadable, but they weren't. Rushed to labs in the United States, investigators worked fast. The data inside was fragile and fading, but somehow it held. Both recorders were fully intact, and what they revealed would become the backbone of the entire investigation. And then the black boxes spoke. What they revealed was chilling. A second-by-second replay of the flight's final moments. Speed, altitude, control inputs, and engine performance. The data confirmed it all. The brakes were applied. The anti-skid system worked. The left thrust reverser deployed, just as it should have. But the right side was a different story. The right thrust lever was not at idle. It was still forward, locked in the climb position. And the engine? It was spooling up, not down. Instead of slowing the plane, it was pushing it forward. Investigators even examined what was left of the artificial feel units, the components that track thrust lever position, but the fire had warped them beyond recognition. No signs of a fault, no mechanical failure. The engines were not malfunctioning. The system was not broken. The plane was simply following orders. If the aircraft wasn't to blame, the spotlight had to turn inward, to the cockpit and beyond. Could even experienced pilots make a mistake like this? Investigators dug deeper, not just into pilot actions, but into their environment. Training, procedures, pressure. Both pilots were seasoned, but the first officer had recently been hired as a captain and had no prior experience on the A320 before joining TAM. Meanwhile, the airline was growing fast, pushing to expand its Airbus fleet. The report flagged concerns. Simulator training hours that fell short of Airbus's own recommendations. Too few co-pilots. Too many captains stepping into the right seat. That imbalance affected cockpit dynamics, and the cracks ran through the company itself. Operations, safety, maintenance, all working in silos. Separate buildings, separate systems, separate teams. The result? Poor communication, missed connections, critical safety info lost in the shuffle. The investigation zeroed in on a crucial piece of the puzzle: pilot procedure. There was not just one way to land the A320 with one thrust reverser inoperative. There were two. The current procedure, updated in January 2007, was clear. Pull both levers back to idle, then move them into reverse. The system would simply ignore the deactivated side. But an older method, still lingering in memory, involved pulling both to idle, then only moving the working one into reverse. In fact, the crew had used the correct method just days earlier in Porto Alegre. They knew what to do, but under pressure, muscle memory can reach for the wrong playbook. That older procedure, it had a fatal blind spot. In high-pressure moments, pilots might instinctively focus on the working reverser, pulling back only that lever. But if they forgot to pull the other one back to idle, it stayed forward, and that's where the trouble begins. On the A320, auto throttle disengages as soon as either thrust lever is pulled toward idle or reverse. That's what happened here. The captain pulled the left lever back. The system shut off auto thrust. From that moment on, engine power was no longer managed automatically. It depended entirely on where the levers were physically set, and the right thrust lever, still in the climb position. The right engine followed orders. It surged to climb power, full forward thrust at the worst possible time. In the simulator, investigators ran the scenario again and again. One thrust reverser deactivated, the right lever still in climb, and a wet runway beneath. Every time, the same outcome. The plane raced down the runway and overran. The results were not just similar, they matched the data from the crash. A chilling confirmation. Asymmetric thrust on a slick surface was a deadly combination. But then came a breakthrough. Simulator tests using an updated version of the flight warning computer, one with a new cockpit alert, changed everything. This alert was designed to warn pilots if the thrust levers were not properly set for landing. In these updated runs, the moment the right lever stayed forward, the warning triggered. The crew caught the mistake, corrected the lever, and the aircraft stopped safely. A simple warning. And the entire disaster might have been avoided. Why would an experienced pilot who had performed the correct procedure before make such a critical mistake? The investigation pointed to several contributing factors. The anxiety of landing on one of Brazil's shortest commercial runways, rain hammering down, the urgency to stop quickly, and perhaps, just perhaps, muscle memory from an older, outdated procedure kicking in under stress. In the dark, rainy cockpit, the position of the physical thrust levers may have looked correct, but they weren't, and with everything happening in seconds, that detail may have been easy to miss. The first officer, still new to the A320, was likely overwhelmed. He didn't catch the mistake, not in time. And there was more. The investigation flagged internal airline pressure to avoid go-arounds and diversions, even if formally discouraged. The message filtered down. Operational silos within the airline meant poor communication across departments like maintenance, operations, and safety. In the end, the report was clear. The root cause: mismanagement of the thrust levers, driven by human factors. The contributing factors: a perfect storm of stress, system gaps, and the cockpit pushed past the edge. The official investigation concluded this wasn't just a single mistake, it was a chain of failures. The primary cause: the misapplication of the thrust levers by the pilot flying, likely an outdated landing procedure executed under extreme pressure. That misstep created unstoppable asymmetric thrust on a short, rain-slicked runway with no grooves, poor drainage, and no runway and safety area. But the problems ran deeper. The airport had long-standing infrastructure issues, resurfaced runways without proper drainage, and no RISA where there should have been one. Inside the airline, procedural weaknesses went unchecked. And on the regulatory side, serious failures. The airport wasn't even officially certified under Brazil's own aviation rules. Construction projects were not monitored, warnings were ignored, and the plane itself? It lacked a simple cockpit alert, one that could have warned the crew about the mismatched thrust levers, a silence that may have sealed the outcome. In the aftermath, the fixes came, but only after 199 lives were lost. The grooves were finally cut into Congonhas runway. Drainage improved. A proper runway and safety area was added, addressing a long-standing safety gap at Congonhas. Procedures for single reverser landings were rewritten. Clear, straightforward, industry-wide. Airbus updated the A320's flight warning computer. A new alert was added, one that could have warned the crew about the mismatched thrust levers. That update came straight from the data in TAM 3054's black boxes, and the simulator tests that followed. Training changed as well. More focus on asymmetric thrust, more realism in simulations, more stress-tested decision-making, and the regulators forced to step in. Certification rules were finally enforced. Oversight tightened. The cracks were always there. It took 199 lives to finally fill them. TAM 3054 wasn't brought down by a single mistake. It was environment, design, human pressure, broken oversight, all converging in 14 fatal seconds. It's a brutal reminder how thin the margin really is, and how fast it can vanish. Pilots train for pressure. Systems are built to protect. But when procedures are unclear, when safety nets go missing, when warnings fall on deaf ears, the consequences don't just stay in the cockpit. They crash through the city below, and they leave scars that no amount of grooving can erase.